license, registration, or just some good excuses, old man. That's what the young cop said, half laughing, as he circled the rusted old pickup. The driver didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't even look up. To them, he was just another nobody behind the wheel. But exactly 1 hour later, a black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a 4-star general. That's when everything changed. Before we dive in, tell us where you are watching from, and what time it is. If you believe in honoring quiet heroes, type respect in the comments, and if you want to help my channel, kindly leave a like. Also, don't forget to subscribe, my dear friends. Now let's get started. Harold Peterson was just trying to get home. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs low and warm, casting long shadows across the back roads. Harold, 82, sat behind the wheel of his old pickup, the same one he'd driven for decades. Its paint was faded, the bumper slightly dented, and the tags long expired. But it still ran. Barely. In the passenger seat sat a half-used box of wood screws, a weathered hammer, and a single metal ramp plate. He'd just left a hardware store, all for a job that wasn't even his. Harold had spent the morning rebuilding a wheelchair ramp for Mrs. Daly, the widow, down the street. Her husband, a Vietnam vet, had passed away years ago. She couldn't afford help, so Harold didn't ask for a dime. He wore his usual, worn jeans, a flannel shirt with one button missing, and a U.S. Army Special Forces cap, sun-bleached and fraying at the edges. That cap had seen more countries than most of us will in a lifetime. To anyone watching, he didn't stand out. He didn't want to. But that changed when red and blue lights flashed behind him. Harold pulled over without protest. No sudden movements. He waited, hands on the wheel. 2 young officers approached, barely out of the academy. Their posture was cocky. One tapped the side of the truck with his flashlight. The other smirked. No tags. Rusted frame. "What are you hiding, Grandpa?" They didn't ask. They assumed. They asked him to step out, more like ordered. He complied. Slowly. He didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't remind them he'd once served under conditions that would make their skin crawl. He simply reached into his back pocket and handed them his ID. No words. Just calm eyes beneath that old green cap. They looked at it, but didn't see him. They were too busy chuckling, making comments about expired plates and expired men. Harold stood there, shoes worn down, hands rough with calluses, saying nothing. Not because he was afraid. Because he knew who he was. And nothing they said could change that. The ID didn't impress them. Didn't slow them down either. They barked questions, some overlapping, others just meant to provoke. "This your truck? You sure you didn't borrow it from someone? You on any meds today, sir, or just off them?" The sarcasm hung heavy in the air. Harold blinked slowly. Still no words. They made him sit, right there on the curb. Gravel digging into denim. Elbows resting on his knees. His cap tilted forward, shielding his eyes from the crowd that had begun to form. Someone across the street started filming. Another whispered. And a teenager, grinning, snapped a selfie, making a thumbs down beside the old man who sat still, like he'd seen it all before. Because he had. He didn't argue. Didn't shout. Didn't plead. Just kept his breathing steady. In. Out. Watching the edge of the sky, as if waiting for it to tell him when this storm would pass. In his pocket, folded neatly and worn from being handled too often, was a letter, personally signed by the Chief of Staff of the United States Army. A letter thanking him for 47 years of service. For the missions that saved countless lives. For valor. For silence. The officers didn't ask what else he carried. And they certainly never checked the glove compartment. If they had, they'd have found a bronze star wrapped in a microfiber cloth, tucked beside his old discharge papers and a photo of his unit. Men with steely eyes, arms over each other's shoulders, all long gone now. But Harold didn't mention any of that. Let them talk. Let them laugh. He'd faced worse than humiliation. To them, he was just an old man in a busted truck. Someone to rough up a little, toss around, maybe write a ticket for the numbers. A nobody. But even nobodies can surprise you if you look close enough. And very soon, they were going to learn exactly who Harold Peterson really was. That's when it happened. The gravel crunched under new tires too polished, too heavy for this side street. A black SUV eased to a stop behind Harold's truck. Quiet engine. Dark windows. No sirens. No flash. Just presence. The young officer glanced back, annoyed, probably expecting another nosy neighbor or an off-duty mall cop ready to film his moment. But then the driver's door opened and everything changed. Out stepped a man in full dress uniform. The shine on his shoes could blind you. For stars across his shoulders. A presence that didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. It followed him like a shadow. The officers froze. One of them muttered something under his breath. Maybe oh. The general didn't speak at first. Just looked from Harold to the cuffs to the phone in the teenager's hand. Then he walked forward, slow and controlled. Stopped in front of Harold and reached down. Sir, let me help you up. Harold looked up. Finally, a hint of recognition in his eyes. Then a quiet nod. The general took his hand, firm grip, lifted him off the curb like he weighed nothing. The officers, stiff, silent. One tried to explain. Sir, this man had no tags. He refused to. The general raised hand. Didn't even look at him. This man, he said, is Master Sergeant Harold Peterson. U.S. Army Special Forces, retired. And unless you want to be filing reports until you retire, I suggest you uncuff him. Now. Silence. Then a scramble. Keys jingled. Apologies spilled. The cuffs came off like they'd caught fire. But Harold just adjusted his sleeves. Didn't say a word. Didn't have to. Because sometimes the loudest thing in a room is the respect a real warrior carries with him, even when no one's watching. He just looked at the two officers, not with anger, but with something heavier. Disappointment. The kind that doesn't raise its voice, because it doesn't need to. The general turned to them, then nodded toward the glove box. Open it, he said. The latch popped. Inside, neatly folded, were service documents and commendation bearing the Pentagon's seal. And then the medal. Bronze Star. One officer froze. The younger one blinked, like the weight of what he'd done was just now landing on his chest. You were Special Forces, he asked, voice low. Harold looked up. Just nodded once. 30 years. 3 tours. Taught people how to survive what you couldn't imagine. He didn't say it to boast. He said it like a man recalling the weather. The general stepped in. This man has done more for this country than either of you will ever understand. And today, he was building a ramp for a neighbor in a wheelchair. For free. That one hit harder than anything else. Because it wasn't just about respect, it was about purpose. Service didn't stop when a uniform came off. Harold adjusted his cap, that old, faded Special Forces cap the officers had mocked. Suddenly, it wasn't just a cap anymore. It was a badge heavier than theirs. A lifetime of grit stitched into cotton and sweat. People across the street had stopped filming. Now they were just watching. Quiet. Moved. The teen with the selfie? He lowered his phone. And for the first time in that long, uncomfortable morning, there was no more laughter. Just a long silence. Like everyone realized all at once that a giant had been sitting quietly in the dirt. The general gave Harold a firm nod. No words were needed. Respect doesn't always speak out loud. One of the officers, the younger one, stepped forward. He reached for Harold's arm, maybe to help him up, maybe to apologize. But Harold was already standing. No help needed. He dusted off his jeans, picked up his flannel jacket from the ground, took a moment, then walked slowly toward the old pickup like none of this had rattled him at all. But it had. You could see it in the way he paused at the door, hand resting on the rusted handle, gaze fixed on nothing in particular. A moment to collect, or maybe forgive. The officers stood frozen as the general turned to them. Next time you think you know who someone is, he said, ask yourself what they've carried before you judge their load. No yelling. No lectures. Just that one line, sharp enough to cut through every excuse they'd ever used. Harold started the truck. The engine coughed, then settled into a low hum, old but steady. As he pulled away, the sun caught the edge of the metal, still sitting in the glove box. It gleamed for just a second before the lid closed gently shut. And then he was gone. No sirens. No headlines. Just the quiet departure of a man who'd spent his life doing the hard things and asking for nothing in return. Back to his day. Back to the ramp he'd promised to finish. And on that street corner, where laughter had echoed just an hour before, now there was only silence. The kind that stays with you. The kind that teaches. Later that night, Officer Daniels sat alone in his patrol car. Lights off. Radio quiet. Just the soft hum of the engine and the weight of the day pressing down. He kept replaying it, the old man's silence, the general's words, the Bronze Star. He'd laughed at that man. Mocked his truck. Assumed weakness. But weakness doesn't survive 5 tours. It doesn't carry comrades off the battlefield. And it sure doesn't walk away without saying a word when it's owed an apology. Daniels reached for his notepad, then stopped. What could he even write? An apology? A confession? The truth? He looked at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't like what he saw. Down the street, the hardware store lights flickered off. Another day done. Another dozen people passed, unaware that a man who'd serve his country with quiet honor had just reminded everyone what dignity really looks like. And Harold, he didn't tell anyone, didn't call the news, didn't post online. He just finished the ramp, tightened the last bolt, brushed off his hands, and waved goodbye to the neighbor's wife, who stood crying quietly at the door. Not because of what he'd done, but because of who he still was. A man of service, a man of silence, a man of strength. In a world obsessed with noise, there are men like Harold Peterson who serve, build, protect, then fade back into the quiet. No hashtags, no headlines, just quiet duty. So the next time you see someone like him, worn boots, weathered hands, and eyes that have seen too much, don't look past them. Look closer. You might be standing in the presence of a hero. And to those watching, if this story made you feel something, anything, take a second. Honor the quiet heroes in your life. Drop a respect in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that matter. Because behind every silent man, there's a story that could change how we see the world.